curious, how have you seen COVID-19 affecting the music industry? I mean, of course, concerts aren't happening. I know Childish Gambino today or recently released an album just direct onto the internet, similarly to sort of how I think Beyonce did an album, maybe 5 years ago or so. Do you feel like there'll be more of those just album drops direct, or are people going to wait for concerts to come back? What do you think?
So that's a good question, and honestly, I wouldn't say that I have the absolute answer. I would say on one hand, we have seen, right, there's not concerts going on right now, like you just said. There's not live performances like that. On the other hand, it's been a point of almost, like I've been saying, like perspective about how can we turn this into something that's poorly and negatively affecting people into creating a positive message, into turning it around, into flipping people's moods. And I think music's a great way to do that. So a lot of what's been happening, again, like you said, is a lot more album direct drops that just go online, and a lot of albums that were supposed to come out in a couple months that artists have said, while they haven't had the time to do the promotion and the backup stuff that they wanted to do, they feel like the people need it right now, and they need to hear some positive messages, some music, some good vibes, something to put them in a better mood, so they're willing to drop it right now. I think Sway Lee did something amazing where he, in his own house, performed an entire concert on Instagram Live. And so did he sell tickets for it? Did he make money from it? No. But, did he have people tuned in a positive way? And was he, putting all of his efforts and his heart into the performance, just like he would if he had sold 1,000 tickets? 100%.
That's
and
cool.
So a lot of people came off of that, kind of saying, again, at a time like this, there's only so much we can do.
Right.
But if there's anything we can do, then let's do it, to kind of push the envelope, to create that positive message, to flip the script on all the, sad and negativity that's been going around right now.
Right.
There are ways to do it. So, I think that it's been a time for artists and the music industry to kind of reflect on how can we still make this impact and create a contribution to society even during a time like this.
Right. On that topic of great content to listen and or watch during this quarantine, do you have any recommendations for maybe specific content that can help people make sense of the times, things that explore loneliness or solitude or self-reliance?
Ruben, that's a great question. I don't even know the answer to that. Like, wow. I mean, I don't know, a lot of people want to see something that makes them escape from all this.
Right.
So, I feel like it's almost like comfort food.
Yeah.
Like people want to, at least me personally, like I want to watch things that sort of like are escapists and things that I've watched before and that I like.
Right. Comfort food, but for content.
Yeah. So I don't know, like I like comedies. I like stupid comedies, like, stuff that I grew up with. Like 80s comedies, like were so instrumental in shaping my personality. So like anything, and I love like the Hangover movies and Will Ferrell movies, and like so any of that, I will watch whenever it comes on. And the other night, you ever see the movie Due Date?
No.
With Zach Galifianakis and Robert Downey Jr.
I'll make a note of it.
It's kind of like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but
I love that movie.
But it's been updated a little bit. It's nothing groundbreaking.
Okay.
I mean, you're not going to learn anything.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, but it's definitely worthwhile watching. And just like, you finish it and you're like, all right, that was good.
That was good.
Yeah. So again, for me, it's all about like, comfort watching right now.
Right.
Although there's some new stuff on Netflix, like Unorthodox. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't. My parents watched the first episode.
Did they like it?
They said they enjoyed it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I know one of the co-creators and writers of the show. She started out as a documentary filmmaker, really talented woman named Alexa Karolinski, And I've also met Deborah Feldman, whose memoir the series is based on.
Oh, cool.
So on the one hand, it's like, oh, cool. Like I actually know people. And on the other hand, I'm like, they're really, really successful now.
So what's it like when you go outside in Poland now? Are you allowed out? Are people wearing masks and gloves, or?
It's up to you, really. You have to like protect yourself.
Yeah.
Some people don't wear masks, and that's bad in my opinion.
Yeah.
I usually wear a scarf or something to cover my mouth and nose.
Good.
That's it. But I go shopping normally. I just wash hands really often.
That's
with,
good.
You know, Aleppo soap. Do you know Aleppo soap?
No. Is that from Aleppo?
It's like super disinfecting soap from Aleppo, the country.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
I will look it up.
The hand sanitizer is really expensive and not really not that much efficient.
Yeah, right. That's true. Has there been issues of hoarding, like we've seen in America? Like when you go to the grocery store, can you buy toilet paper, or was there a panic buying of that?
There was that first boom that I mentioned earlier, and at that time it was madness, because I was just like watching all the situation and kind of laughing at it because I didn't participate in that. But some people were spending like 1,000 zlotys on one shopping. That's like $400, I think.
Right.
And yeah, people were like crazy buyers. You know, they were buying crazy amounts of pasta, toilet paper, flour, water, everything like this.
Right.
But now it's kind of like settled a bit.
And how has the Polish government's response to it been? Do you wish that they enacted the stronger laws earlier on, or do you think they've done a good job?
Well, I think they've done a good job in implementing the laws early on. You know.
Yeah.
But then I think they're kind of over exaggerating. They're giving the police too much power.
Are there any philosophical ideas that you've learned or that you like that you think could apply to what we have going on right now? I mean, in terms of saving lives, you know, we can talk about utilitarianism and trying to save the most. But is there anything from your studies that you think interestingly applies here? I know that's putting you on the spot.
Hard question.
It's okay if you don't have an answer right off.
Well, I guess, yeah, like utilitarianism you can use in this situation very good, because I think that's also like the kind of ethics that a state should do.
Right.
Because, like, I don't know, you're a democracy, then you have to like help as many of your people as possible. And I also understand these whole like terrible decisions of the doctors, that they have to think, okay, good, like what's with, I have an 80-year-old guy that is on a ventilator because of like some not corona related reason, but then I have the 40-year-old family father. Okay, good, gotta give it to the family father. And there's like lots of different ethical considerations to do in this crisis. I mean, in general, yes, utilitarianism, I think, is just the most practical approach to this.
Sure.
And just like to try to help as many people as you can, in the best way, and have the best utility out of this whole situation. And then, but then if you use like something like Kantian ethics, you just don't get nowhere. You know, because like then you're just like, okay, good, yeah, I have to respect completely the dignity of the person, and why should like something that is unrelated to like this 80-year-old person now basically kill him? Right. You know, why should that do? But we are in this crisis and we have to think practically, I think, and that's why utilitarianism in this sense is the way to go. Right. Because that's practice. Right. But then you see Great Britain, for example, that uses this like utilitarian model, and they just like miscalculated, I think, in the beginning, because like Johnson was like, okay, good, yeah, we'll just because the economical repercussions will be so bad, we'll just like keep business open as usual, and there's going to be deaths, but yeah, the greater good is the economy and how much other people would suffer. Well, now you see they changed their mind because that's not working, and that's I don't think it's utilitarianism's fault. It's just like a misapplication, or just like the calculation of this whole issue.
Something I read in that New York Times article was that part of the reason they decided to pull volunteers out was they didn't want to risk stranding them during the pandemic or putting them at more risk. But then if you look at the US, I mean, New York has more cases than Italy, and there's cases in California, there's cases all over the country. It seems like you might have been safer down there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was thinking, because I was like so rural and so remote. I was like, okay, like no one ever comes here, like let alone tourists, like they're never gonna come here. So I'm like way safer than LA County or Orange County, which is where I am right now. And I really didn't think that Peru was gonna get evacuated. While other Peace Corps countries were evacuating, like first they evacuated Mongolia, China, obviously. China completely shut down their Peace Corps program.
Right.
Never going back.
I could ask you about that too. But
And then Thailand got shut down, Indonesia got shut down. So mostly Asian countries were shutting down, and then a couple in Europe and like Morocco and stuff. But before the global evacuation, so it was just like on a country by country basis. So
interesting.
Specific Peace Corps countries were deciding to evacuate the volunteers based on their country specific situation. So I thought I was completely safe in Peru, especially because they were like being proactive. But when it comes to evacuation, it's more about like the health and safety of the volunteers. So where we are as volunteers, it's like mostly rural and like isolated communities where it's hard to find proper healthcare. And so sometimes if we need something like, but I needed an MRI during my service, and my like Peru Peace Corps doctors flew me to Lima to get that MRI because that's the only place in all of country that I could get one.
Wow.
So it becomes more about like transportation and safety, whereas like if a volunteer got hurt, say they broke their leg or something, they couldn't get the attention they needed in their site to properly heal and properly recover from an injury or even a sickness, but they couldn't like travel to get that attention.
So some people say, well, we all should just act like we have it, and that'll be the solution. But if you have coronavirus, if you have COVID, like you're taking way more precautions than like, it is a huge, on top of just being in self-quarantine, like you're supposed to be in your own room, you're supposed to have your own bathroom, you can't be like cooking your own, you can't be cooking with other people. I live with 3 other guys. There are like a lot of things that we're sharing, bathrooms, and like if one of us had corona, I don't want to be, cooking in the same kitchen with them. But, that's a huge change in all of our lifestyles we'd have to make if we all acted like we all have it, So I think it'd be just much better if we were aggressively testing. One of my roommates like got a cough and had like some other symptoms a few weeks ago, and it was like pretty uncertain, but it went away pretty quickly. And none of the rest of us got it, at least that same cough. So potentially, we don't even know. Maybe we all have corona, and we, And so that's my point. It's like we should be testing for, even if you don't feel sick, just know that you can go get tested.
Yeah.
And then the antibody test will be huge, so that the people who have had it and now are okay, they can go back to work. They'll be like superhuman healthcare workers who can just treat corona, they don't even need the mask. It's all good. So, I mean, that we should be aggressively pushing the vaccine, more clear information, just to like, even just one Twitter feed or something that's like super reliable. The leaders need to be deferring to scientists and specialists at pretty much all times. Like, politicians have basically no role in this at this point. They should just be deferring and getting the right people in front of us to make things clear.
Well, I mean, isn't the politician's role in some way to hear what the scientists are saying and then sort of enact that in a public way, i.e., shutting restaurants down, shutting bars down, things like that? The scientists can't do that, right? I mean, they're the ones crunching the data and looking at the patients and.
Right. So if like an actual law needs to be passed or a mandate or whatever, that has to come from the politicians. But other than that, like, we should be, for the most part, they shouldn't be saying anything. They should just be putting the right people in front of us who are experts, and we can hear it from them, and we'll all respond accordingly.
Yeah.
What's it been like, now that we're kind of a little bit hopefully adjusted to this online learning phase of finishing out the year? How's that been for you?
It's hard. It's definitely not the best way to learn. And it's on both ends. Like, professors don't love to teach online, and students don't like to learn online.
Of course.
So it's definitely not as engaging as a normal classroom in person would be. But I think that overall, people are able to manage as much as they can. But it's been difficult to adjust, just to kind of keep motivated and stay on top of stuff and make sure that things are getting done. But I think, one of the nice things about it is that it's kind of close to the end of the year, so it's not like this has been going on all year.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely an adjustment. And it's taken a bit of time for me to get to this place where, like, kind of get the drill down and everything. But it definitely did take some time. But I think over the last 4 weeks, I've been able to adjust pretty well. So, yeah.
Do you feel like what you're learning at all has maybe informed your outlook at all? Like, how do you see your major playing a role into maybe your outlook or your learning? Like, has it been easier for you as opposed to other majors who maybe, like, been struggling?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because, like, for me, a lot of my work is just it's writing based. In the healthcare world as a healthcare major, a lot of it is reading, writing, that kind of stuff. But I can imagine I've talked to some of my friends who are more in the hard sciences, and they take like lab courses, and that's kind of, you can't take a bio lab like online. That's kind of obviously doesn't work. So in terms of my learning environment, it's been fine because I've been able to read and write a lot. But I know for a lot of my friends, it's a lot of teachers had to alter the way that kind of the end of the year syllabus went because of all this stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
As this was all breaking out in New York, what was it like running the program and communicating to the founders?
So when this first kind of broke out in New York, we were in the 7th week of our 10-week program. So we work solely with international founders.
Right.
And for them and for the program, this was a huge blow because some of them had to go back to their home countries. Some of them could not even go back to their home countries because the borders closed, and 1,000,001 different issues. And that's just personal, but also on the professional level, on their business level, all of a sudden they had very, very different priorities of just keeping things afloat.
Right.
And all these other problems that have come up because of these bizarre circumstances. So we actually had to pause the program in the 7th week. And we continued certain things. So we continued like our one-on-one meetings with the founders on a weekly basis virtually, and some of the group things we were able to continue for a bit. Actually, until the 10th week, we were able to do some of the programming virtually. But officially, we paused the program, and we're allowing the participants to make up the weeks that they missed in upcoming programs.
Wow, that's a great approach. That's admirable that you were able to keep giving them support, and then also, recognize that this was time lost, and they'll be able to get it back once this is hopefully over. So I think that's amazing, and that that actually answered a couple future questions that I had for you. So you beat me there. How many of the founders did go home? All of them by the end of the program, of course, but half.
Yeah, half of that. So we had founders from the UK, India, Tunisia, Mauritius, Denmark, and France in our program. And half of them had to go back to their home countries. Half of them stayed in New York, but not under their own desires. They were forced to stay in New York because they couldn't return to their home country.
Have they been able to go back since the end of the program, or is because of the travel restrictions they're still
yeah, one of them was able to, so now 4 of the 6 are in their home countries. 2 of them are still stuck in New York, which in any other circumstance would have probably been very nice and fun, but they're stuck in in between 4 walls. So
I know, I can't imagine. I'm sure it's pretty scary for them. I mean, that's really, to be a startup founder alone in the greatest city on earth, but the epicenter of this pandemic. I mean, that's very frightening. A big thing with your grandmother's battle with this was you were very active on social media. I was checking out some of your Instagram and Twitter. What was it like going through that with the internet on your side?
Oh, it was a very strange phenomenon, because a lot of times people consider social media to be toxic, but really I think things like Twitter especially, they're very powerful, and that goes in both directions. So
totally.
You can be cyberbullied or be harassed, and that's awful, but you could also see the generosity in full magnitude, and I think that's exactly what happened in these dire circumstances. People actually become a lot nicer to each other, and it was amazing. Nothing like that had ever happened like that to me remotely. And I kind of feel like some of the good energy that came from it almost like manifested itself in the physical world. So I don't know, she had all like thousands of people who I don't know, like cheering her on, who were interested in following her progress. So in a way, it almost feels like now that we're in lockdown mode, everyone's life has almost become like a documentary, and some people become like interested in following, because we all are experiencing this to different magnitudes, obviously based off of different factors. Socioeconomics is a big one, but to a certain extent, we're all going through the same crisis. So I think people were just fascinated to see if this 91-year-old sweet grandmother is going to make it through. And it almost feels like to me that like it almost had to work out, because they're all cheering for her. So it definitely helped offset the gut-wrenching feeling of it all, because every day was kind of like gloomy. Especially when she came back from the hospital, it also felt like I'm living with like a dying person, but hearing everyone so enthusiastic, saying that was like the highlight of their week, hearing that she's like pulling through, that made it a lot better. So if I didn't have like this whole social media experience of people rooting for her and sharing her story, it would have felt a little more isolating. So I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I have basically everything that I need, and her situation was not as perilous as it could have been. And plus she got all these like people, even after she's recovered, people are like still chatting about her. It's really funny.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
What I'm seeing with the crisis is, I think right now, in its current state, it's more of an economic crisis than a medical science crisis. And the reason I say that is because ultimately the cure for this will be through medical science. It will be through developing a vaccine or developing an antiviral drug treatment.
Right.
But currently, the crisis that we find ourselves in is a lack of resources. We have a huge demand for these resources, and we have a finite supply, which is the root of economics. So specifically, those resources are protective equipment, Those resources are doctors and nurses, hospital beds, ventilators.
Yep.
Those resources are coronavirus tests. We'd be a lot better. Everyone says the only way we can really go towards some sort of reopening is if we had many, many, many more testing facilities than we have now.
Yeah.
So I've been looking at this whole crisis from my perspective. I'm seeing all these kind of issues of resource allocation, resource availability. Regarding the macroeconomy, which is what I think a lot of people talk about, first I'll tell you where I think, and this is probably a highly charged statement, but I'm just going to go for it because I was told that this is not a censored show.
It's not.
I'll tell you where I think some right-wing pundits are coming from, which is that I was always taught in the kind of more holistic school of economics that I was trained in, that it's about value, creating value, that a human life obviously has immeasurable value over the span of its duration. And that therefore, if you look at the macroeconomy, preserving lives is one of the best things you can do, both in terms of the skill investment that those workers have, that they're able to contribute, as well as just the body count, having more work, make more ideas and do more arts and crafts and do more manual labor and all those things. And once you lose a life, the incubation period to go from an embryo to a skilled tradesman is a very long time.
Yeah.
It takes a generation.
Yeah.
So once you lose a life, it's very hard to replace. That being said, I think that on the right side of the economic spectrum, you have a lot of people who fall into kind of the Malthusian camp. Malthus, not exactly sure on all my details of this, but essentially, from what I understand, he was a religious figure of sorts back in the day, as well as a theorist and economist. And basically, he pointed out that population growth happens exponentially, but there's a finite amount of land and resources. And so when people talk about Malthusian economics, it's basically the concept of overpopulation being a bad thing because we only have so many resources to get spread out to everyone. The earth only has so much copper, so much land to grow food.
Right.
So I think that a lot of people who are saying, we need to get the economy up and running again, kind of have the opinion that if a few people die, especially, I would imagine they have an inherent bias that they won't be among those that die.
Yeah.
That probably the 3% who die are going to be, the poor urban masses.
Right.
That they'll be able to hide out in their house somewhere. I heard of wealthy people buying private ventilators and keeping nurses on retainer.
Yeah.
And so I have a feeling that when they think about the economy, they kind of have this somewhat twisted, although somewhat valid perspective of if 3% of people died, then the earth would be a bit less crowded. And I could go back to buying assets a bit more cheaply, and I could have a bit more breathing room in the park when I'm doing my yoga.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where people are coming from. I already stated why I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, why I think that there is, fundamental economic value in people's lives, in keeping people alive.
Absolutely.
And I think that another thing to be thought about is that even if the restrictions on reopening things are lifted from a legal perspective, that you're not going to have the same demand, because there are people who are going to be worried for their health and who are not going to be going to restaurants and bars, etc.
Totally.
So that being said, I don't actually think that reopening or not reopening from the legal perspective makes that much of a difference, because I do think that inherently this is a man versus nature problem. And you can say the beach is open or the beach is closed, but if the beach is flooded, no one's going to be on the beach.